Garland Nixon here again to talk about the issue of police violence from a bit of a different perspective. Once again, I was a law enforcement officer for over 20 years. I retired as a major, and I have a lot. I'm also a member of the board for the ACLU for both the state of Maryland and the national board. Something I'd like to talk to about a little bit that isn't discussed very frequently, and that's the issue of standing. And going back to Dred Scott and today, and it's something that's not discussed, but I think it's important, and I think it is a matter that is in fact at hand. So what do I mean by standing? If you try to file a lawsuit against somebody, it may be thrown out because a judge may determine that you don't have the standing to file a suit. You don't have the capacity to bring this action to court. You know, maybe there's a particular legal administrative reason you don't. You may be trying to sue on behalf of someone that you don't have connection to, that you can't sue on behalf of, etc. But the question is, do you have standing? So let's go back to slavery and black people and the issue of standing, okay? During slavery, one of the famous incidents was during Frederick Douglass's young life, where a slave was shot dead in Frederick Douglass's presence by a slave owner, and some of the local Quakers decided to go to court to have the man charged, the slave owner charged with murder. And the judge found, as they did frequently during slavery, that there was no standing to bring that. The slavery couldn't bring the slave himself or the slave's family, no one like that could bring it. They didn't have standing to sue a white person. A slave had no more standing than a pig or a cow. So in court, a pig or a cow couldn't sue, a slave couldn't sue. Dred Scott basically found that. What the Dred Scott decision was one of standing, really. It was that black people, no black man has the capacity to bring a white man to court in America. And so it was an issue of standing, of legal standing and social standing. So that's a question when we talk about standing that we don't discuss in America, because when it comes to police violence, because when we look at something on video that is so blatant, when we see an innocent man gunned down and the black community says this needs to be addressed, and in many instances, in some instances, but in many instances, there will be some sort of a hearing, some sort of a decision made by an entity, maybe a grand jury, maybe a prosecutor, that they're not going to move forward. They're not going to take action on the case, right? And we'll look at the video and we'll say, my gosh, how obvious is that? Look at the Aaron Garner video. What more do you need? What better example do you need than a man who begs for his life? A police officer works for a police department. The police department says in writing, you will not use chokeholds. In their patrol manual, the New York City Police Patrol Manual, it specifically says you can't use chokeholds, and it specifically says because they can kill people. In violation of the manual, Officer Pantaleo uses a chokehold, the man begs for his life, and exactly as the manual says, the person dies. And a grand jury determines we're not going to take any action. Here's my position on that. It's a matter of standing. It's kind of like, it's similar to Dred Scott. What our society has determined time and again is that people of color, black people, Latinos, and now let me add this in because people don't leave this out. Mentally ill and homeless people, the same treatment. But that these particular groups have neither the legal nor the social standing to bring action against law enforcement officers. I remember a particular case. It was in the 70s that I read about, where a member of the Los Angeles Rams brought an action against the team. And it had to do with him injuring his knee, with doctors saying, no, it's fine, you can go back to play, and him saying, I don't want to play. They forced him to play or lose his job. His knee was torn up. His career was destroyed. Cut and dry case, because he had all of the information he needed to prove that he was deceived by the team, that the team went against doctors' recommendations, and in fact, he should have won. One of the jury members afterwards was quoted as saying, I don't think a N-word we know what that means, should be able to sue a white man anyway. So why did he lose his case? Because the jury found, informally, not formally, remember we're talking about formal and informal law, it's formal and informal justice in America. The jury found informally, under their breath, outside of the context of the law in the case, the jury found that that black man didn't have the social standing, though he had the legal standing. He didn't have the social standing in a society that is hierarchical. He didn't have the social standing to sue a white man. And they believed that. They threw his case out. He lost. I think to some extent that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at a particular area of where most of us see it from the perspective of the law. And we try to see it from the perspective of the law, of right and wrong, of good and bad, right? What happened? This is what happened, and this is what should happen, right? An officer did this, it's on video, certain things should happen. However, in America, in a society that's hierarchical, right? The rights in America, we'd like to believe that they're universal rights. The rights aren't universal, they're hierarchical. So in America, the issue of what happened is not important. It is not the deciding factor as to whether or not action is brought against the law enforcement officer. It's not about what happened. It's about who it happened to. That's the deciding factor. You know, my grandparents, I've heard, very, very old people tell me stories about police back in the day, right? Way back in the 40s, whatever. And what they said was, if an officer came on scene of a complaint, they had to first find out who made the complaint against whom before they could decide who was right or wrong. If they come and there was an area, was it a black man who made a complaint against a white person? If it was a black man that made a complaint against a white person, then they knew that we got to disregard that. If it was a white person who made a complaint against a black person, well, then we got to act on that. And then if it was two white people, they had to decide, was one of them a WASP, was one of them a Pole, was one of them a Jew, was one of them Irish? There was a hierarchy in our society. And when police officers got on the scene, they had to look at the hierarchy and see who fell where within the hierarchy. Well, wait a minute, we've got a WASP against an Irish, so that the WASP, now we have to go with them. The issue of standing had to be interpreted through the lens of the hierarchy. It wasn't about what happened. The officer didn't come on scene and say what happened. He said, who did it happen to? And then once he knew who it happened to, the officer knew on whose behalf they had to act. What I'm saying is that in America, that's what we're looking at today. We just don't want to recognize it. If you see an officer act against a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 17-year-old white female, and that goes before a grand jury, you're going to see one reaction. If it's a dark-skinned, 17-year-old black male with braids, you're going to see a whole different action. The grand jury, the prosecutor, etc., can't make a decision on whether the officer was right or wrong until they know who the officer acted on, right? That's an issue of standing. That is a result of a social hierarchy. A hierarchy which, historically, black people didn't even fit in the hierarchy, right? There was a hierarchy in America. To just explain that hierarchy very briefly, you had what was called the melting pot. Most people don't even know what that meant. Here's what it meant. The melting pot meant there was a WASP society in America, okay? And in order to fit in America, when you came here from wherever, you had to melt away your culture and accept the majority, the mainstream WASP culture, right? So within the melting pot, there was a hierarchy. There was WASP at the top. And then you had the term that was actually used was the white ethnics. You had the Italians, and you had the Jews, and they weren't even considered white ethnics, but you had the Italians, you had the maybe Greek Americans, you had the Irish Americans, right? So there's the WASP at the top, and there's this hierarchy, and wherever you were born within that hierarchy, that's the station that you stayed at. You didn't move up, you didn't move down. Okay, so that was the melting pot. Black people weren't allowed in the pot. They were outside. They didn't even fall within the hierarchy. That's the tradition in America. So black people had no standing. That they couldn't sue basically anybody. They couldn't take much of an action against anybody because all the courts needed, or all society needed to know, was that it was a black person taking an action against a white person. They only needed to know who. A social hierarchy, when an incident happens in a social hierarchy, right? The people who make a decision, who dispense justice, don't need to know what happened. They only need to know who it happened to, so they can see where those individuals fall within the hierarchy, and they can make a decision based on who's higher or who's lower. I am arguing that that's what black people are up against today when it comes to police violence. That our society still does not recognize black people as having the social or legal standing to bring an action against a white person, particularly, in some instances, but particularly when it comes to law enforcement officers who are viewed in a lot of ways as the defenders of the social hierarchy. In a lot of ways, they're viewed as those who would defend us, right, the white Americans, from them out there, the black Americans, the Latino Americans, the homeless, the mentally ill, whatever. So it's since the police departments are viewed as defending, the us being white Americans, from the them being me and, people who look like me or think like me, the standing is never conceded to people who are the us, because that would upset the hierarchy. That would destroy the hierarchy. It's an issue of standing. It's an issue of social standing, and you will see time and time again when you have the discussion. If it's a white person, the discussion goes one way. If it's a black person, the discussion goes another way, and the term is standing. Does this individual have the legal standing? Surely the law says yes. To bring the legal standing, the capacity to bring action in court, but social standing, going all the way back to slavery, going back to the Dred Scott decision, it has been found time and again that black people don't have the social standing to bring action against either a white person, or in this instance, the representation of white society, which is law enforcement, which is law enforcement. Whether it's a black police officer or not, they still represent the wall, the defense of mainstream white society against those who are considered the other. So that's just another perspective I thought people might want to think about, the issue of standing. Because then you don't get into the issues. People get frustrated. People get angry. And they say, well, wait a minute. It's so clear. Look at this. The officer did this. You can see it on tape. You can see it on video. We've got people who are willing to testify. Why won't they move forward? Well, ask yourself this. Would they move forward during slavery? You could have all the videotape, even though it didn't exist, you want it. But here's the problem with the videotape. It shows the color of the people in it. So the videotape only serves to strengthen the hierarchy. The videotape, when they look at it, I'm saying we need videotape because that's what we need to move forward and to fight forward for equality. I'm not saying, oh, forget the videotape. No. But I'm simply saying that if you look at the videotape shows the people of the color in the videotape. And for those who defend the social hierarchy, as soon as they look at the videotape and they see the color of the people in the videotape, you're looking at what happened there in the videotape. They're looking at who it happened to in the videotape. Your decision of justice or injustice is made based on what happened in the videotape, the acts and the actions you're seeing, right? The defenders of the social hierarchy are making their decisions based on who it happened to. That was a cop. He couldn't have been wrong. You know why? Because of who he was dealing with. He's automatically right because there's a black person. The shooting is automatically justified. Why? Because of who was shot and who was doing the shooting. The attempt to bring the officer to justice is considered ridiculous because there is no justice for people who don't have social standing. A cop comes in and they shoot somebody's dog, right? Well, the family can certainly sue, but the dog can't sue. If there was two dogs there, the other dog wouldn't be able to sue and say, hey, you know what? You just killed my brother dog. No, why? Because dogs don't have standing to sue in court. Even if the dog could talk, sorry, you don't have standing. You're a dog. I think, that's what was found continually in court in slavery. It may seem kind of harsh. That's what the Dred Scott decision found. And that's what informally we're facing today. People who don't have social standing. And if they don't have social standing when it comes to law enforcement, then they don't have social standing anywhere. Garland Nixon, I'm on WPFW 89.3 FM every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Also, WPFWFM.org if you want to check it out. Email is garlandn@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Just in the mood to get on and talk about this a little bit. Maybe on another time. Maybe, actually, I think I might go check out the Steely Dan concert this evening at Jiffy Lube Pavilion. But I will be back, and thank you very much. Have a great day. Peace. I'm out.